Hello, I'm Susan Mickey, and I'm going to introduce the second part of our training video on how to use the Behaviour Change Intervention Ontology to apply theory to interventions. What we'll cover in this video is linking theory to evidence, so explaining findings, research findings using theory, and also using the BCIO to guide the development of theory-based interventions, and specifically focusing on the theories and techniques tool to do this. The learning objectives of this video are to firstly describe how theory can help to understand the outcomes of behaviour change interventions, and secondly describe how the BCIO can be used to guide the development of theory-based interventions. So first off, using theory to explain research findings. I hope this will be familiar to you now. A bird's eye view of the Behaviour Change Intervention Ontology with the intervention at the bottom left-hand corner, working through mechanisms of actions to bring about an outcome behaviour and modified by both engagement, that is the reach and exposure, and also the context, the population and setting and events, and all of those things being taken into account along with the research study methods to produce a value of an outcome behaviour. So for this video, the first thing we want to look at is explaining variation. We know that any one intervention may have very variable effects depending on which population is targeted, what the setting of the intervention was, what duration, what period of time it was in, and what part of the world it was in. And in order to understand that variation, we need huge amounts of data. So this is represented like this. We have lots of different combinations of what we call these scenarios, which are represented here with the triangles without the top. And by looking at evidence organized in this way, with very large amounts of data, which really can only be identified and analysed using AI or artificial intelligence or machine learning, we were able to then look at these complex interactions and be able to really understand what's behind the finding of so many evidence reviews, which is small to medium effects with a high degree of heterogeneity. Well, theory helps us to understand what is that heterogeneity about. And this is incredibly important when being able to generalize from what we know, where the research findings were directly extracted from, to situations we don't know, which often, for example, parts of the world where the need is greatest for interventions to improve health or sustainability. So that's explanations of a variation, but also theory can help in terms of mechanisms of action or the processes of change. How does an intervention bring about the outcome behaviour? So we have a whole ontology just looking at mechanisms of action. It's a large and complex but very important ontology within the BCIO. Here you see part of the mechanism of action ontology in the background and a little square of it zoomed out, and you can see various entities there, including what's called emotion process, which has various kinds of emotion as children of the parent class emotion process. And here we have one entity, belief. And as you can see, there are various types of belief, what are called children of the parent class belief. And then you can look at evaluative belief and perceived norm, and they have other children or subclasses. So that's the mechanism of action, and you can use that to specify processes of change or hypothesize processes of change within behaviour change interventions. And now I'm happy to hand over to my colleague, Dr. Marta Marquez, who will be talking about using theory to design behaviour change interventions.
Thank you, Susan. So in this last part of the theory training module, we'll be looking at how you can link a theory with behavior change interventions. So when we talk about influencing behavior, and hopefully you have seen that in previous training videos, we use a set of behavior change techniques, that is the potentially active ingredients that are designed to change behavior and can actually have an impact on behavior. And we can have multiple BCTs or multiple behavior change techniques that are used to influence behaviors, but their impact on behavior is explained by the mechanisms of action. So these are the processes, as Susan explained before, through which a behavior change technique might affect a behavior. And this is the crucial pathway for designing interventions, because we start from identifying the mechanisms of action that are expected to influence behavior. For example, belief was the example you've seen before, and different types of beliefs. And the behavior change techniques that we will select in that specific behavior change intervention to change that behavior will be designed and will be implemented to change that specific process. So for example, if a belief is an important process or hypothesized to be an important process to change your target behavior, you will select behavior change techniques that have an influence on different types of belief or a specific belief. When we're talking about behavior change techniques, this is an example from the Behavior Change Techniques Ontology that is available on the BCIO Search and BCIO Visualize tool. And you also have the paper describing the ontology of behavior change techniques in our collection at Welcome Open Research. So the ontology classifies 282 behavior change techniques that are distributed hierarchically in 5 levels, and they have 20 higher order groups. So if you look at this example here, where we have a behavior change technique that is called Guide How to Perform Behavior Change Technique, you can see that there are 5 child classes. Agree on how to perform the behavior, advise to avoid people who do an unwanted behavior BCT, instruct how to perform that behavior BCT, demonstrate the behavior BCT, or suggest how to perform the behavior. Depending on the mechanism of action that we are trying to target as part of our intervention, we can select one or more of these BCTs to influence that mechanism of action. We have here a more broad example of how these things are linked. So for example, if our behavior is increasing medication adherence, and we hypothesize from the literature, from evidence, from previous experience, that a core mechanism of action that is involved has to do with the memory, attention, and decision processes, so the ability to remind ourselves that we need to take the medication, for example. One of the techniques that we can use to increase that ability is prompts and cues. So we can use reminders on very different sources, like using post-its or using digital reminders, to increase the level of memory, attention, and decision processes that in turn is hypothesized to increase a certain medication adherence. Because we have a large number of behavior change techniques and a large number of mechanisms of action, it can be quite overwhelming and difficult to navigate and understand which behavior change techniques should be selected for which mechanisms of action when one is developing an intervention. So having this in mind, the group of researchers from Human Behavior Change Project, in collaboration with researchers from other institutions, developed this tool called the Theory and Techniques tool that was initially developed as part of this project, Theory and Techniques project. And if you go to the link that is provided in the resources, you will be able to access the website that presents this dynamic tool, and you will see a matrix similar to the one that you have here on the PowerPoint. So you will see that on your left side, you have a list of behavior change techniques. So common behavior change techniques were included in the Theories and Techniques tool. And then you have a list of also core mechanisms of action that were included in the tool. Bear in mind that this tool was developed before the ontologies of mechanisms of action and behavior change techniques. So it only contains a limited amount of mechanisms of action and behavior change techniques, but these are the most common ones that appear in the literature across behaviors. So what can you do with this tool? You have information here for each of the cells that provides our knowledge about the links between each mechanism of action and each behavior change technique. So the cells that are in green represent links between them. The cells that are yellow represents inconclusive results. The cells that are blue represents that there are no links, and the ones that have a light blue represent no evidence between those links. And this information results from a triangulation between searching and synthesizing evidence on these links for a variety of behaviors, but also from expert consensus studies where experts were asked to also provide their knowledge about the links between mechanisms of action and each of the behavior change techniques. This information is all provided in the website, where you go to more information about the tool. And of course, there was a criteria for establishing the presence of having a link, not having a link, or being conclusive, which is a statistical parameter based on the triangulation of the information. So let us look at a few examples. If you're using the theory and techniques tool to design an intervention, you will need to know, of course, what is the behavior that needs to be changed. What could be the mechanism of action that could be changed to change that behavior, so the process that you need to influence for the behavior to change, and what BCTs might change that behavior. This is what information you need to bring and how the theory and the techniques tool will help you. So let's look at an example. If the behavior is use of condoms for safer sex, the mechanism of action might be to have enough knowledge about how condoms can actually prevent, for example, sexual transmitted diseases. If you go to the Theory and Techniques tool, you will be able to identify which behavior change techniques can actually increase knowledge. And you will see that providing information about health consequences is a behavior change technique that shows to have a link with knowledge. So this is a technique that can increase knowledge about the use of condoms for safer sex. And you will also see, if you look at the Theory and Techniques tool, that using, for example, prompts or reminders or using goal setting is not a behavior change technique that is going to increase knowledge. So we are not saying that these BCTs or behavior change techniques can't be useful to increase the use of condoms, but not through these mechanisms of action. If you want to increase knowledge, then you work on providing information about health consequences. If you want to, for example, help people remember that they need to use a condom, so in that case, the mechanism of action is related with the memory, attention, and decision-making processes, then the behavior change technique related with the use of prompts and cues has a positive link with that mechanism of action. So you can see also another example in this slide. If the mechanism of action is social influences, so how your social network or the person you are with supports the use of condom for safer sex, for example, to prevent sexual transmitted diseases, you can have a look at the behavior change techniques that have shown to have a link in improving those social influences. And if you look at the matrix, you will see that information about others' approval or disapproval about the behavior or providing social support are two behavior change techniques that have shown to have an impact on positive social influences that will in turn impact positively the target behavior. Some behavior change techniques that have shown not to have a link with increasing positive social influences is, for example, goal setting or practicing the behavior. So again, as I said before, it doesn't mean that practicing on how to use a condom, for example, is not important to increase the probability for people to use condoms for safer sex. It will likely support that, but it's not through the mechanism of action social influences. It's through a mechanism of action that is more related with knowing how to conduct the behavior. A really important aspect of the Theories and Technique tool is also that it provides a link between the mechanisms of action and measures that were developed as part of a project called the Science of Behavior Change project, and you have the link in your slides and in the useful resources where you can find that information. This is a project that listed scales and questionnaires and ways of assessing the mechanisms of action that are represented as part of the Theory and Techniques tool. And this is really important because it helps you in going one step further and being able to identify questionnaires and other forms of evaluation that can be useful for your intervention and in designing your intervention to know how you can measure the mechanisms of action. Because it is really important that for each mechanism of action that you select, that you have actually a measure to identify if the mechanism of action was or was not impacted by your behavior change techniques and your intervention. So just as a brief summary, you can use the Theory and Techniques tool to design an intervention. That was the main purpose in the second part of the video, was to show you the benefits of this tool in supporting the development of an intervention, but it can also help you to retrospectively go back and understand reasons for the success or failure of an intervention. Because if you go back to the tool and you link the mechanisms of action with the behavior change techniques, you might realize that you could have selected by mistake behavior change techniques that are not expected to impact on those mechanisms of action, and this will help you to improve, refine, and optimize your intervention. You can, of course, link the intervention that you're designing or that you have designed with theory through the mechanisms of action. If you identify a set of mechanisms of action that are actually useful and relevant in the context of your behavior and intervention, you will be able to identify theories that conceptualize and go further in detailing these mechanisms of action. And the theory database that was also developed within the Human Behavior Change project can be quite useful for this. And this can also help you in refine and improve theory if you identify that there are mechanisms of action that should be linked or that should be added and they are not at present. And finally, as I've shown in the previous slide, because we now have a link between the mechanisms of action and measures that were compiled as part of the Science of Behavior Change project, you will be able to, when selecting the mechanisms of action and behavior change techniques for your intervention, you will also be able to identify what measures can be used. And then by testing these measures, we can also improve the understanding of which measures are more useful for which mechanisms of action. Just to finalize the video, we leave you a list of main resources that we advise you to have a look at and explore and that support this video, and you will have the rest of the information on the website. Thank you.